Christmas morning. With few options, the police took him to the local station house, an ancient building made of brick and stone that would shelter him from the bitter winds of the Tyrrhenian Sea. They fed him broth and let him rest on a cot in an open cell, hoping he would regain his voice. In time, he regained several, starting with a whisper that barely rose above the level of his breath. The sound slowly increased, building to a crescendo until it could be heard by the two officers in the next room. They hurried down the corridor, expecting to find the stranger fully awake and willing to answer their questions. Instead, they saw a man in a semi-catatonic state who was babbling in his sleep. His eyes were closed, and his body was rigid, yet his lips were forming words. One of the officers made the sign of the cross and said a short prayer, while the other ran for a pencil and paper. When he returned, he pulled a chair up to the cot and tried to take notes in a small journal. Maybe they'd get an address, or if they were really lucky, maybe even a name, but they got none of those things. In fact, all they got was more confused. The first words spoken were German, then French, then Portuguese. Before long, he was mixing several languages in the same sentence. Dutch, followed by Spanish and Latin, English layered with Greek and Russian. Every once in a while he said something in Italian, but the words were so random and his accent so thick that they made little sense. Still, the officer transcribed everything he could, and before long he noticed some repetition. One word seemed to be repeated over and over, not only in Italian but in other languages as well. Il trono, le trone, el trono, the throne. This went on almost for several minutes, language after language from one man's mouth, like the devil speaking in tongues. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. No more words, no more clues. The man would never speak again. 2 days later, after he had been identified, newspapers around the globe reported his death. Yet there was no mention of his strange behavior, nothing about his ramblings or the throne he kept describing. Instead, reporters focused on the colorful details of his life, his wealth, his accomplishments, his discoveries, all the things that made him famous. Of course, if they had known the truth about his final days, what he had finally found after years of searching, they would have written a much different story. One of fire, deception, and ancient gold. One that wouldn't have an ending for almost 2 more centuries. Chapter 1. Present day, Saturday, May 17th, Matera, Greece. The monk felt the wind on his face as he plummeted to his death, a journey that started with a scream and ended with a thud. Moments before, he had been standing near the railing of the monastery, the monastery of the Holy Trinity. It was one of 6 monasteries perched on natural rock pillars near the Pindus Mountains in central Greece. Known for their breathtaking architecture, the monasteries had been built 2,000 feet in the air with one purpose in mind: protection. But on this night, their sanctuary was breached. The intruders had crossed the valley and climbed the hillside with silent precision. They carried no guns or artillery, preferring the weapons of their ancestors. Swords, stored in scabbards, were strapped to their backs. Daggers in leather sheaths hung from their hips. Bronze helmets covered their entire heads except for their eyes and mouths. Centuries ago, the final leg of their mission would have been far more treacherous, requiring chisels and ropes to scale the rock face. But that was no longer the case, not since 140 steps had been carved into the sandstone, leading to the entrance of Holy Trinity. Its front gate was 10 feet high and made of thick wood, yet they breached it easily and slipped inside, spreading through the compound like a deadly plague. The first to die was the lookout, who, instead of doing his job, had been